Greetings, listeners, and welcome to On the Spectrum podcast, a show that will explore and investigate the many complexities and diversities of being on the spectrum. We are your hosts. My name is David and Lorena. And in today's episode, we will be delving into the world of neurodiversity.
Welcome everybody. Our guest today is Andy Reddy. He's an esteemed expert in the field of neurodiversity, and with him we are going to explore all the content related to neurodivergent people, its implications, and what it means to live being a neurodivergent person. So welcome, Andy. I need to say thank you, and it's an honour to have you here in our first podcast. So you open this new project for us. Would you mind to do a quick introduction for yourself?
Okay, yeah. So it's an honour to be here, to be perfectly honest. So my name's Andy Reddy. I run my own business, which is Reddy Coaching and Training. And what I do with my business is that I run consultancy, training and coaching for neurodivergent people and individuals, and for companies as well, and supporting neurodivergent individuals.
Mm-hmm. Right. So what did inspire you to open your own business and be a coach? Okay,
so there's sort of three main areas to this. First of all, that I have dyslexia, so I'm neurodivergent in my own way, which I was diagnosed at 6, and the more I understand about ADHD and that area, I wouldn't be surprised knowing that 2 in 1 people with dyslexia and ADHD, I have those traits as well. Also, I have a son who's now 20 who is autistic, and he basically went through mainstream school, got diagnosed about 7 years old, had an EHCP, and then ended up going to Dove House, which is a local school in Basingstoke, and now has gone to QMC and is a real success story. Really proud of him. And then finally, I came from an educational background, and I sort of was an assistant head in a school in Farnham. Then I went over and I ran a CAMS for acute mental health school, which was Lee House in Winchester. And during that experience, unfortunately, there were just lots of children, sort of 12 to 18, so young adults and children, who basically had been sectioned. And the one thing which really impacted me, knowing myself being neurodivergent and seeing my son, was the amount of neurodivergent individuals in that who'd either been diagnosed or who hadn't, and were really misunderstood. And if they had had the right support in their life, then they wouldn't be in that situation. And that made me think, I need to do more. I need to make a difference, because what's going to happen to my son in the future? And knowing what I'd been through, and that's why, luckily, my wife was amazing at then supporting me making that change and starting my own business. So that's why I'm here today.
Well, we are happy that you're here today with us. So we will look into how we are meeting the needs within the context of education later throughout the interview. But now we would like you to define for everybody to understand what is neurodiversity.
Okay, so I do sort of lots of training and things in this area. So it's quite simply, if you split the word neuro, which is thinking, so cognitions, and a diversity is different, so thinking different. And that is basically an umbrella term which includes ADHD, autism, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dyslexia, and Tourette's syndrome. And there are arguments for other areas for that to be that. But I think what is the important thing is that with neurodiversity, it's it was coined in the 1990s, and the whole idea is that it's about natural variance in our neurological differences, and that actually the way that somebody who's neurodivergent, their brain is fires slightly different, the way the autonomy of the brain is slightly different, and what we have to realise is that there's a difference, not a deficit. And the problem is that's a lot of the feedback that people have received in the way that we have set up society.
Okay, yeah, interesting. Do you think that our general population has a narrow view about all the conditions associated to those neurodiversity, all of these that you mentioned? And then I also read in your Instagram that you were talking about all the hormones involved and how sometimes they are deficit in some of them, as you just mentioned. Do you think that people are actually aware of the whole plot that comes with it?
I think the reality is that the answer to your question is yes, I do think people are have a narrow view, and I think the reality is unless people have a connection to a neurodivergent individual or neurodiversity in one shape or form, then there is a huge lack of understanding, and I think that's down to awareness and training, and that's going from education. There's nothing statutory what has to be put into place. That's also when you go into then the working world, it's the same. There's reasonable adjustment what should be made from a legal point of view, but actually there's nothing to say that people should have statutory training. And I think often what happens is because people don't understand, then that creates this stigma and this unconscious bias against individuals. And what people see is this sort of iceberg of, they look at behavioural mental health problems, but then they don't look underneath that and realise all those different things that that individual will be getting feedback from their environment, and then that leads to that narrow viewpoint, because what they'll see is a child in a shopping centre screaming, but what they haven't taken into effect is all that sensory input that individual might have had to deal with. And so I don't necessarily think it's the population's fault, but I do think what the government needs to do is put in more statutory things where people have to have training for understanding.
Perfect.
That's great. And yeah, through that, they'd be able to understand more of what they're seeing in the workplace, and also be able to cater the workplace towards the individual a bit better.
In education as well.
Or in education as well,
where individuals are just continuing.
Because I worked at Dove House. I was a teaching assistant there, and they were a great school when it came to catering towards the children's needs and things like that. Yeah, it was good. They had such a variation of levels, and they did a lot of stuff around awareness, especially at sort of like when you do the whole school assembly and stuff. There's always a very clear message, and the children actually started to understand each other, and they wouldn't question things like when someone's got headphones on or anything like that. And it was very good, and they were very aware. Like most schools I went to, I'm not sure if they get that kind of awareness of each other and how they work differently.
Unfortunately, they don't. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is that there's a reliance on the Senko for doing that.
Yes.
And if the Senko is not in a senior leader position where they have a voice, because on the Senko to practice you don't necessarily have to be, it's advised, then they might not be able to get an opportunity to go and discuss that on CPD, or they're so bogged down now with paperwork because of the massive increase of diagnosis and increase of EHCPs that actually they then just don't have the time to do that and to put those messages across to individuals, unfortunately.
Yeah, the Senko at Dove House was actually trying to hire an assistant because her caseload was so heavy. It was so heavy duty. So we were going to move on to the common stereotypes and the misconceptions, which I think sort of links into what we're saying. But what are the common difficulties that you have to support your clients to overcome?
I think it starts very much from understanding themselves and understanding that input they get from the environment they live in. Because what often happens is that people will get a diagnosis of whatever, if it be autism, if it be ADHD, and then what happens is often the waiting lists are huge, first of all, to get a diagnosis, where you're now waiting 2 or 3 years, and then you have to wait for the NHS then to signpost you to normally a charity. So often what happens is that you get this sort of tag, and then you're like, but what do I do next? And actually, some of the work that I do is I work with independent people who do assessments, because one of their bigger problems where they get is that people get the diagnosis and then they're like, who do I go to? What do I do? So the first thing for me is that it's making sure people understand what that diagnosis means to them, and how that impacts them. And once you sort of do that, then sort of there's an array of things which is quite common. So the ones that I really sort of end up addressing or talking about or creating a toolkit for individuals to support is communication differences, because especially with autism, where often sometimes there's a misunderstanding and it's from both parties, and that's the big thing that often we forget. Neurotypical people misunderstand neurodivergent people as much as neurodivergent people, but then what happens is the neurodivergent person gets highlighted as being different, but actually no, it's the environment what makes them different.
I see.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
The sensory sensitivity, so that's obviously including the hyper and the hyposensitivity, and how that impacts somebody, and how that sort of infiltrates that those levels of anxiety. For other people, sort of executive functioning challenges, so that keeping themselves organised and then processing of information and not getting the overload of information, creating flexibilities and routines, and then building a trust and rapport, because often with a lot of neurodivergent people, they have such a negative impact, because from the very moment they find out they're neurodivergent, they're being told they're going for a diagnosis, they're being told there's a deficit, so straight away they're being told that there's something wrong with them, when actually that's wrong. That's the world we've created what tells them what. So in reality, there's 4 key areas that I support, and that is sort of supporting working memory, supporting with organisation, supporting with time management, and then supporting with sort of mental health and well-being. So they're almost the toolkits that I help people create, so then they can manage themselves in this neurotypical world that they live in.
Sure. So it's very much promoting independence and being able to strive on your own and find out what your own talents are and what you can do as an individual. Yes.
And I think with that is that you can't. It's key. For years, people would say about, oh, you need to cure my child, or I need a cure, and actually that's the reality. Is not, you can't cure the way that your brain fires, but what you can do is you can find your strengths.
Certainly.
And then you can work for your strengths. And I know, for example, with mine, like my key strengths is if I'm up talking, because I don't have to do the reading and writing, so I can go and present, and that's really not a problem to me. And I also know that I'm really empathetic, so I know when I have people come to me, I will really listen to what they need and then try and support that, to give them what they deserve to make steps forward in their lives.
Great. And you can have someone in front of you, and you can you've got like a toolkit in your head of like, oh, I could do this and I could do that with them. So you're very good at reading what the other person does. So. And they commonly say, I think I read a TED talk about it when they were like, they were saying that people with dyslexia and things, they have other areas that they will strive at, especially visual. Apparently they're very good at architects, and they're very good at creatively coming up with stuff. And I have dyslexia myself, and I've gone into creative areas. And I think there's something about, because I don't really want to call it a restriction, but because there's some difficulty there in certain areas like reading and writing. Like for example, when I was studying drama, I would memorise the scripts because I didn't like to sight read. I didn't want to be up there, and I just think that sometimes the restrictions make you more creative, and I think that's why maybe creativity is linked in with that. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's something that I think happens.
I think the problem is that we're pushed into a world that we've created. So the world that we created. So if you're talking about pure somebody who's dyslexic, we're created in the world that if you think every day we're sending messages, we're writing emails. So every day, if you're dyslexic, you're faced with the very thing which is the challenge that you have because of the way that we communicate. Well, that's a concept that we've created rather than something that we have to do. So actually, why is it that I have to write emails? And at the moment, assistive technology is not quite up to standard, but I think sort of in the next 10, 15 years, you will have a lot of more different ways that people communicate, and it won't be all written, or it won't be all read from a pure dyslexic point of view. And that's where then you'll get to see these creative people really sort of thrive, rather than having that negative impact that they have to manage all the time.
Yeah, and I think the fact that they have to think outside the box because of that restriction. I think that's why they exercise their mind to think, well, how can I do this differently, or how can I do this like that? So and I agree with the email stuff. It's actually getting easier now. The technology's sort of catching up and underlining things, and I'm noticing more of and it's taken me less time to reply to emails. But I always feel like it does take me probably twice as long to reply as normal people, because I will read it. I'll read it again. I'll write it, and then I'll read what I wrote before it goes off. And that was my way of dealing with it, to make sure I double check it like every time, And I read an article that you wrote. It's called "Breaking Barriers and Unlocking Potential: How Dungeons and Dragons is Transforming the Lives of Neurodivergent Individuals." I read a bit of that, and I thought that was interesting, and I thought you might want to elaborate on why engaging with this game is so beneficial for neurodivergent people.
Do you know what? I think this is brilliant, because what it does, is that it gives that escapism, and it provides a safe environment where, if we're talking about somebody who's autistic, there's black and white rules, there's clear boundaries, there's safety within that. You're not going to be judged. You're not going to necessarily get negative feedback if you act or behave in a certain way. So you can really imprint that creativity and without prejudgment. And so that really creates this imagination and that stimulus that actually somebody who's neurotypical might not be able to bring. And that also, with that, then what that does for somebody who's neurodiverse is actually it helps them to grow their confidence, because what they do is then they start to really thrive in a social interaction setting, and helps to really improve communication skills, where sometimes miscommunication can happen between a neurodivergent and neurotypical people. And then that allows the individual in that world where they've got that psychological safety, that they can really problem solve and they can really be critical thinkers without any bias against them, and allows them to be emotional expressive, and also then allows for that empathy development. If a character's being killed off, where a lot of autistic people are misunderstood on their levels of empathy, actually what that does is really start to associate in a safe environment about why people might feel a certain way within that, without being judged, and also it improves things like executive functioning skills, as well as creating this community and belonging to somewhere where often with people who are neurodivergent, they often become isolated, some by choice, but also some by, if you're going to a world and everything is ambiguous, and you might get told off for one reason or another, and you don't really understand why would you want to be in that world? So I think it's a great opportunity for individuals to thrive.
Yeah, and it puts everything into context, doesn't it? Like you said, when you're playing the game, you're using your imagination, and therefore you can safely explore. I think, that's great.
But I guess that if you always go out there and then you have like a negative experience or a negative feedback, or you are being refused, or people don't want to play with you or work with you or talk to you, at some point I think you are like, okay, why I'm gonna keep trying when I know that every single time that I try is a negative response. So for what you say in the article, is like it looks like they can be themselves without any doubt or any fear about what's gonna happen, or even receiving a negative response back. It's like I can be myself no matter what I do or how I do it. It's just a game, and that game brings the flexibility of I can be myself. Does it make sense?
Yeah. What it does, I think, in sort of what you're saying, is it removes the neurotypical etiquette, what neurodivergent people don't always understand or see. And so by creating boundaries, you then can't be judged, and that then takes away these levels of anxiety and stress to allow people to thrive.
Yeah, and once they've exercised that in the context of a game, it's a transferable skill that then they could apply to their own lives. Yeah, it's great.
Very much so.
I enjoyed it. I played it once. I was Shadrock the Ill, I think, and he got eaten by a bear. I think in the end, but I really did enjoy. I really did enjoy the experience though, and I was playing it with people that I'm pretty sure neurodivergent people. They're very creative individuals, and it was a really fun experience. And when I read the article, I was just suddenly, it was showcasing all of the learning outcomes. Like if you think of it from an educational point of view, if you think of it from a therapy point of view, you have loads of outcomes there as well. It reminded me a lot of what happens in drama therapy, the way you take on a role and you can explore something in a safe way. And I think that the game has a lot of applications in that area. So I thought it was an interesting article when I read it.
Can I just add that if you're in a Basingstoke area, Dice Tower Cafe.
I've been wanting to check this out. Yes, I've been wanting to check that out.
They do on a Wednesday night where you can pay and play, and they do different levels, and they're really inclusive and very aware of their customers. So I would highly recommend if you're in that area to go that, which is the old Red Lion pub.
Yes.
On top of town in Basingstoke.
It's on the second floor or something, isn't it? Yes, I remember. I did want to check that out. I think that would be very
worth
cool.
Going to, very much so.
Awesome.
And Scott, the owner, is very inclusive. So
that's great. Awesome.
Good. Well, let us know how it goes.
So I will be checking it out.
About neurodiversity, we all know that it's not only about personal experiences, it's as well, it has its impacts in different settings around the individuals, like education, work, family. You mentioned already a little bit about what happened when the students, the neurodivergent students, are in the school. I'm going to read your experience because we are going to talk about how we do in our educational system. So you, Andy, have been head of the year and assistant head in Farnborough Head End School and education manager in Lee House Hospital Education Unit and Senko. So from your point of view, how is our educational system doing in attending those neurodivergent students' needs?
Well, I think this is probably the most difficult question that you'll probably ask me, because there's been a lot done on trying to support, and I think that needs to be highlighted. And so what I mean by that is you've got the SEND Code of Practice made changes in 2014, which basically states that all teachers are teachers of SEND. So SEND is special educational needs and disability if people don't know. So that states that all teachers need to support individuals and they have to be responsible. So the SENCO is not the person who basically makes sure that everything is that everybody's doing SEND. No, what they do is they oversee and they make sure that the children have the needs put in place. But the teachers should be looking at what the SENCO's put in place to support and have to be responsible for that. So you have that. You have the Equality Act, which was in 2010, which basically neurodivergent or neurodiverse is underneath disability, which is one of the 9 characteristics, which basically states that we have to make reasonable adjustment for individuals in any settings to make sure that we level the playing field for people. So legally, that means schools legally have to be doing something to support individuals. And if they weren't to do that, in effect, they could be liable to be sued. And then obviously the teaching standards of 2012 again state that they need to support SEND. So from the legal documentation, there's lots in place which should be put in. And the SEND Code of Practice, they had statements, they changed to EHCPs to try and support and to create specialist provision to support individuals. And so those are legal documents. If you have an EHCP, legally you're entitled to whatever's written on that document. So in effect, if the school aren't doing that, you, again, as a parent, you could sue the school if they're not doing that. So there's been lots in place, but the reality is that the government have removed more and more money away from education in the last 10 years. And the reality of schools is that you've got 30 children in school with lots of diverse needs, and then the teachers are held to account against a curriculum that they have to deliver in a certain period of time. And so that makes it very challenging for the individual to ensure that everybody's needs is met. So Senkos do a great job in the sense of they will inform, they will make sure when there is money for support staff to be and support individuals. They will do extra things outside. So if for example, in junior school, they'll have Nessie, which is a spelling and reading writing. You've got ELSAs for emotional support, where people are struggling with their anxiety. So there's lots in place in that sense. But actually, because there is little money, there's no time to give to individuals, or there's not enough time to individuals. And the Senko de practice is 0 to 25 on purpose to allow individuals to have longer in education. But until the government start bringing in statutory requirements to make sure people are trained on autism, make sure people are trained on dyslexia, the problem is the Senko can only do so much. So for me, it's about the whole system needs to be looked at again, in the sense of more money needs to be put in to support individuals. There needs to be more training, so staff from the very point of entry, i.e. when they first get trained, there's a whole module on what each individual needs are and how they support that. So it's quite a difficult question without it becoming a political question, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I hope I answered that okay.
Oh yeah, definitely, because you're talking like big picture here as well, but then if you narrow it down to the individual, then it's very difficult to actually put things in place on an individual basis, but then actually train everyone on the holistic approach, like as a whole. So it's.
I think also the reality is what often happens is the Senko is sort of earmarked, and what will happen is parents will ring up because they're right, their child might not be getting what they need. But the reality of the Senko now is that where you've got a huge increase in improvements in assessment, that means you've got a huge increase in people getting diagnosed. Yes. But then there's nothing to support that. So then what's happening is the schools are getting more and more diagnoses, more and more EHCPs, and the Senko just basically becomes a person who deals with paperwork. Yeah. And the reality is they're not out in classrooms looking at individuals and going, oh, they need this, they need this, because they have to adhere to the legal paperwork first, and then that means that some children will get missed. Sure. And until that improves, and the only way that's going to improve is money, because the Senkos need people to support themselves, to free themselves up to do that, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then the training on top of that, getting people in to train people in various neurodiversity, that's also going to cost money as well.
Andy, we were talking about that we have created a nice legal framework to make sure that we attend all the neurodivergent students' needs, and then we attend neurodiversity, we tackle those difficulties that they have within the system, and we talk about that definitely we need to put more money and resources and train the teachers for them to be aware, because what it look like is that we are overloading them because they need to deliver the curriculum plus attend 28 students' needs, and then it seems that every single time we increase those diagnoses. So, but talking about the national curriculum, do you think that we are flexible enough and is embracing those neurodivergent student needs?
I think this is quite a simple answer to me. There's a reason why the code of practice is 0 to 25, and the reality is the code of practice, Senko code of practice is 0 to 25 because people need more time, and that's the reality. So I don't think that the curriculum is flexible for somebody who's neurodivergent, and I think what often happens is people either can't survive. So if somebody in mainstream schools, so they will try and cope and they won't cope, and what then happens is that they either become school refusers, or if they are fortunate enough to get an EHC, which is very difficult to get now, then they might be able to get access to sort of alternative provision in the sense of schools which can cater for their needs. Or what happens is that individuals might get through GCSE and they might sort of get through, but then when they go up to the next level, then they're not prepared for the next level. So when they go into A level BTEC, then, and what that does is then they then fail at that attempt. Whereas actually, if you had a more flexible curriculum with more time, with more support, then actually what you might do then is mitigate those chances of people to failure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, thank you.
Yeah. How do you feel about them? Because I remember at Dove House they did a lot of life skills. They did cooking stuff. They did things that are just generally life lessons, like how to manage. And they'd always sort of incorporate sort of maths into doing your bills and things like that. And more vocational kind of courses, like there's AQAs, and I know you mentioned BTEC. I think you can do BTEC first, which is still kind of GCSE level. That's a little bit more practical, and think like, what do you think are those sort of like variants that you could use?
I think for somebody who's neurodivergent, I think they're really powerful to allow those people to, one, become independent.
Yes.
So it depends, obviously, how that individual trait has impacted them. And also, so, you know, especially if you're talking to somebody with autism, you know, for somebody with autism, if you're doing learning something which just isn't relevant to them and it doesn't transfer, then they will naturally it won't be relevant, so they will switch off from it and they won't necessarily learn it. So I think very much if you're thinking about those sort of skills, then it's really sort of imperative, really. And people learn differently. So like, I'll give you a prime example. When I did my I did better in my masters. So I've done 2 masters and I've got a merit and distinction than I did in my degree. But because the way that they're written, because one's exam based and one is a written based, and where I had written based, for me, that I could really plan my time and I could work out the writing and I could revisit and I could make sure that I understood what the questions were asking me, and I had time to do that. And so that's where we sort of fall down, really. We set up these sort of standards of you must do it this way, you must do it that way, but not everybody learns that way, or not everybody, their brain doesn't necessarily connect that way. You know, I'm sitting here today, right, having this discussion, and I've got notes in front of me on what we're discussing, because I know that I wouldn't be able to talk at the level that I could without my notes. So why would you put somebody in an exam where actually that they might not be able to do that without... Yes. And so I think that's really important when we're thinking about actually what we do. But the problem is the government we have in power, they want traditional exams, and so that's why we push towards that, because that's what the Conservatives like. Whereas if you had Labour come into power, then you would go back the other way.
Sure.
And you'd start having a more diverse curriculum.
Yeah, and a lot of what we do here at Loddon is very catered towards what you're saying, like something that is meaningful to them. And we always try and cater a lot of what we do. You know, when I'm doing Lego therapy, or if I'm doing the storytelling sessions and things like that, I always try and cater the stories and make it engaging for them.
Yeah.
Because once you get that engagement, that's when the opportunity for learning is like you said, you know, people are going to switch off if they're not having a good time, if they're not engaged with the material. So yeah, I think it's very important for there to be flexibility,
especially
in
if you're thinking of
education.
somebody who has autism, who that monotropism. If it's not in their interest, you know, that will.
But it's also as well, I think, adjusting, as we are saying, is like if I don't have the notes in front of me, having the notes helps me out to go through. That doesn't put you in a position that you are a less knowledgeable person. It's just that it's your ed to go through. And then I think talking about Loddon, our training department is really good at these kind of things as well, and adjusting what the individual needs to go through their assessment. So if you are really good at typing and then you want to type and do like an assessment or like a text, and then you want to write your answer, you are more than welcome. But also, if you're not really good at typing and then composing a text, you can do an audio. So you take your notes, you go there, you sit down, you go through, and then you are actually doing the assessment in the same way, because you are showing that you are knowledgeable and that you know what you are meant to know. So they are that flexible in that way, and I think that is facilitating everybody to access to do training, or to increase the CPD, and which is the main purpose, isn't it? Like I will adjust myself for what is better for you, instead of you adjusting what is more convenience for me,
how you are going
because
to
it's
learn.
easier. Because you are the one actually learning. You are the main person here. You are the one that needs to fulfill your career, not me. I'm the one supporting, and I think that's what we need to do in the educational system. The students are the main people, and we need to adjust according to what they need, if that makes sense. So what would you change within the system to make it accessible for everybody?
Oh well, there's lots of different things. So
between 3 and 5.
Oh wow, okay.
Unless that you have like a really good list.
I've got a really big list. I think the first of all is you got to think about flexible timetabling and scheduling. You know, in the working world, you talk about actually working hours, but yet in the school, in a sort of standard state school, you're like, you've got to work this time, you've got to work with this person, and then you've got to move from one subject to another, and then you're wondering why somebody's then having a meltdown or shut down and can't cope. Because of course they can't cope, it's too much stimuli in one day, so it's not unfair. I would have flexibility in pathways, which is specialist, which again in your system setting you can do, but in a state school setting you can't, and that's where often that leads to school refusers, where children just can't cope. So develop comprehensive transitions and planning. So we're really focusing around the individual. And again, this comes around money and people to have the time to do that for individuals. And then sort of implement more higher standards of policy and legislation of support. Because as I said to you at the moment we sort of adhere to a few things, but actually they could be much better on sort of supporting individuals. I think with that it's providing teaching and training and support, which we've talked about. So there's that continual personal development for educators. So actually they understand those individuals in the classroom and how to support them, and know when they're reacting in a certain way, and they might not necessarily be being rude, it might just be that they can't cope. The standard naughty child, what often happens. So incorporate a multi-sensory approach, which I know that you guys do here, and so I would have much more where we can have you can get multi-sensory environments as well, where children can go and help to regulate themselves before they sort of reach that point where that they are at crisis point and can't cope. I think this will come into place in the next 20 years. Provide assistive technology. Schools are so far behind the times when it comes to assistive technology, but actually when children can have sort of better ways of learning, and like we're insistent that we have to write all the time, but actually when you go into the working world, how often do you write? You type most of the time, and yet we're insistent. I'm not saying that I think there's a room for both. Before anybody sort of says to me, oh, you're saying get rid of it, that's not what I'm saying, but what I'm saying is that we need to look at each different thing, and then really train staff and children about inclusivity and why people might be reacting a certain way, because again I don't think we do much of that at all, and then sort of collaborate with parents as well within that, in actually making sure, because the same kind of practice says that we should be capturing the voice of the individual and also that wider support network. So actually we're getting that as well, that input, because too often we play lip service to it of what's going on at home, and actually we could be getting more to do that. if that makes sense. And then really sort of making sure that we're continually evaluating and feeding back about children and giving staff sort of that understanding and feeding back to them. And that can be done with personalised learning plans and more in-depth pupil passports and things like that.
Yes.
Of children.
Yes, could we do those here? We have communication passports and occupational therapy passports,
The schools
which really
do
does inform.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, excuse me. Sorry.
Yeah, but it really does inform about the individual, like you say.
Yeah.
And it gives staff that are maybe working with that child for the first time. They've been told they've had the handover. They've been told some information, but they've just got this extra little bit that just explains. Oh, that's why. That's why that's happening right now.
See, that does happen. A good Senko would do that in the state school, but then there's often not time to foster that collaborative working of, here's a passport, I've done one, but actually has the teacher read it, they then have the time to go through that individual as a group or as a group of teachers, right, actually this is what this child needs, and often it's not the lack of trying that it doesn't happen, it's the lack of time, where now in schools teachers have to record and save so much information because of showing evidence that actually then we forget about the most important thing, and that's the child.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's funny saying about the families as well. I mean, do you promote sort of consistency in approach when it comes to them going to school and when they go home? Like, would you want the parents to sort of implement the same strategies or sort of support the school if they decide to go in a certain direction? Because you're saying you'd like someone to liaise between the two.
Yeah, because at the moment you might have a Senko, but actually, you know, if there's things that are working for the child, or if there's things that you know are working at school, there isn't enough time or room often to have those conversations. And again, it's not a lack of trying, but it comes down to lack of staff and support, and which then takes away the time. And I think if that was there, then that would allow maybe to support these children better to thrive and not have negative experience of education, which often happens.
Yeah, because I know working as one-to-one, you get to know the parents quite a lot, and then you start to realise that they give you advice of things that work at home, and then vice versa, you give them advice on how to get focus and attention from them when they're at home. And it's a nice, but like you said, I was mainly just focusing on this one child, and I'd have those conversations with the parent, but there's no official meeting. There was no like you said, there was no time to actually sort of finalise it and make it more.
Or what often
efficient.
happens if you've got a neurodivergent child, often the parents might be neurodivergent themselves.
Sure, yeah.
And often where things can sometimes be difficult is that actually sometimes the parents need support and don't always necessarily recognise that. So there also should be a better support for those parents on managing themselves and managing their child. And again, that would be more work what needed to be done in the community, but often there isn't that support there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. So we're actually moving on to talking about families. Like, how does neurodiversity impact on family? Like, I think like siblings, for example, can be sort of unsung heroes sometimes in this sort of area where they have to sort of accept that their brother or sister needs more attention, needs more time from the parents, and then they sort of sometimes have to get on board with some of the care aspects or things like that. So I think neurodiversity, can sometimes impact the family members, and I just wondered if in your field whether you've ever come across those kind of conflicts. And
I was going to say, are you talking about my own individual family, or are you talking about
families in general? Yes,
yeah. Because I was going to say my family is, as I said, I've got dyslexia. I have an autistic son. And also I have a nephew who's autistic and has cerebral palsy.
Right.
So yeah, just from the lived experience, I think you sort of have to break this down into sort of my in 5 areas. So I would talk about the neurodivergent individual, the parent or the guardian, the siblings, the extended family, and then the overall family dynamic. So in my mind, you look at those sort of 5 key areas. So for the neurodivergent individual, how that would be impacting them is the potential challenges that they may face. So that might be in communication, social interaction, experiencing burnout, but then also trying to, traditionally what we did is we said, oh, this is where somebody's weak in this area, let's really push on this, and then we take away what they're good at. And actually what we've got to do is start at an earlier age to highlight these strengths and actually really go with those strengths. Especially if we're talking about autism, what often happens with autism is that the individual might have a special interest, and then we say, oh, you can't talk about that special interest, but that's what they're good at, so why would you not allow them to be good at that? And I'm not saying that necessarily you talk about that all the time, but actually we have to highlight that strength. And I think the other thing that you have to think about as that individual is that they may face stigma, they may face this unconscious bias against them, and some people might feel that, some people might not feel that. But there was definitely sort of, when individuals start to hit through puberty, that's where individuals start to look at my peers, because what we do naturally is we group ourselves and we look at ourselves in comparison to everybody else. We can't help that as animals. So that's when it sort of really starts to show. So you've got that, and managing some of that negative input from the environment that neurodivergent, because of the society and world that we've created that they have to live in. Because remember, if you go back to us being animals in effect, actually why wouldn't you want somebody with ADHD who might be pounding the area to stop us from getting the predator from eating us? Why wouldn't you want somebody who's autistic, who's a real black and white thinker, and saying, right, we need to do this, we can't do this? So you can't. That's really important to not lose sight of the impact from the environment. From parents' point of view, it's that navigating and understanding, especially if they're not neurodivergent themselves. So I really experienced that with my wife, who is neurotypical, and our son, as I said, is autistic, and sometimes she's really, really kind in the sense of a great mum, has always really looked after him, but sometimes she will say to me, I just can't understand why he might think like this or behave like this, whereas I sort of get it. So luckily I do, so it means it's a good match for us. And then accepting, because again some people will feel guilt, because they will feel, especially with women sometimes, where they've bore the child, and if they're then neurodivergent and they're not, then they sometimes will place unconscious blame on themselves. So managing that, and then sort of advocating for their child's needs, and then that again, especially with females, balancing that caregiving responsibles and seeking support while trying to juggle a job. And unfortunately, the world we are now, when you speak to most people, both partners are working because of we live in such an expensive economic climate. And then I think siblings is a great one. You said unsung heroes. I think they develop a unique relationship where empathy and that real understanding and almost that protection, and there's I can't remember what the exact figure is, but there's quite a high percentage of people, if they have a neurodivergent sibling who is of need of support, actually they end up in sort of a caregiving role, whatever shape or form that might look, because they're used to that and they have that understanding. So they then have this sort of mixed emotion and then have to make potential adjustments, and can be very aware of the world around them, maybe less naive to the world because of what they experience. So it sort of gives them this great understanding. And then the extended family, I think, is always interesting, because you can get a really varied level of understanding, where you've got either people who really get it and can be a great support network, or you've got the opposite, where people really don't get it, and then they can almost sometimes be quite negative, or they can be like, oh, just why are they behaving like that? Just tell them to do this or tell them that, and don't understand the child's needs, or will be like, or they grow out of it. And if we go back to this, it's the way that the brain is made up that then makes it, they're not going to grow out of it necessarily. They might learn better strategies to cope and to fit in and mask in the world, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not harbouring this anxiety to do that in society. So that can foster in families inclusivity, or the opposite of inclusivity, where actually then it can create divides, or impatience of, oh, I don't want to go like that because that person's going to behave like that, or and so, or the unacceptance or embarrassment sometimes if they're, if you've got somebody, let's say, who's autistic, and maybe the conversation is a one-way conversation, that individual can't necessarily help that, because that's how they communicate in the world, and so that can create divides in if there isn't acceptance and understanding. So from that then leads to the overall family dynamics of that can adapt of strengths and needs, but also can create problems depending on how those are. So it's, to me, when I'm working with families, it's really about making people understand that individual thinks differently, and that we're balancing the challenges and celebrating achievements. Because what often happens with a lot of neurodivergent people is that they focus on the negative, but then they don't stop because they just assume they're going to achieve the positive. And so actually what we have to do is actually celebrate successes, which sometimes can be the smallest successes. I remember when with our son, he couldn't do up his shoelaces, and we, and everybody else had been able to do it, and he was still struggling. And so, we made a real big thing about that, because he needed to celebrate, because to really sort of improve his own self-confidence, if that makes sense.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, and it's all about that encouragement, and it's going to obviously help him achieve that again and again, and help him practice it, because he sees value in it, because he sees value in himself through your encouragement. That's really good. But it's a complex thing, when the way that family react to neurodivergent people, depending on their upbringing as well. I've got the classic one where they're just like, no, give them some discipline, do this, do that, and you're just sort of like, well, it's not really going to work. That's not really going to work.
You might create a worse thing.
You'll probably end up with a worse situation. Yeah, or he's just having a tantrum. I've had that one a few times, And it's interesting you say about the blame thing as well, because our son we're waiting for a speech and language therapist, because he's a bit slow on his speech at the minute, and she gets very anxious, like, oh, is it something I did? Is it something? And it's kind of like sometimes you have to sort of back down and be like, no, it's okay, we're doing all right, And he's got his own journey, he's got his own thing to go on, and we've got to support that. Okay, so next, Andy, we'd like to talk about how we can grow independence and set real expectations for individuals who are neurodivergent.
Okay, I think the first answer to this is that obviously you need to know how the individual is affected by their traits. And then it's really important that we foster self-advocacy skills, so that actually we embed in that individual that if they do have challenges, that yes, they do have challenges, but actually that can't be a reason not to do things. So it means that they might take longer to do things, or things might be harder for the individual, or they might have to take smaller steps to reach the goal, or they might need time. But actually having that expectation where you still can achieve and you can highlight positives is the real key to those things. So what I mean by that is, obviously, if you look at autism, somebody their traits might be affected very differently. So if you have somebody like you might have in the school who's non-verbal, actually them getting up and supported getting dressed, that might be that achievement, and you celebrate that. Whereas you could have somebody in a work setting where actually they might to cope, they might have to have less clients that they're dealing with than their peers, but actually then they might become very strong in those areas. So it's about ensuring that individual is really pushed on not allowing those sort of things which are challenges to hold them back, in a sense, around their own spheres of accountability. And you do that by sort of making individuals decision makers where you can. Again, that's not always depending on how the traits. To be self-reflective, and so to really celebrate successes and to install a growth mindset. So if a growth mindset is actually looking to improve and looking to always make those steps forward, to ideally collaborate with support networks. So as a trustee of Autism Hampshire, for example, in the Basingstoke area, there's a serendipity autism group, which again, Loddon School come and support as well. So just by then meeting other people who might have the same strengths or same challenges, then helps to see people that they're not isolated. And then setting realistic and achievable expectations, and this is the problem sometimes with the school setting, that actually, are we always putting people through the right qualifications for what that individual needs? So by doing that, are we setting them up for fail on that negative input? And then developing sort of practical life skills, because again, if we're talking about autism, some of those skills, they have to be taught. Those individuals aren't going to necessarily pick them up like somebody who's neurotypical. So actually you need to check for understanding that individual has been shown that skill, the model has been skilled, and then it's been revisited. So that person knows exactly what they're meant to do, because they might not be able to see how to do that skill. And then support a really positive, psychological safe environment where individuals are allowed to progress in their own time frames, to ensure that they're successful in their own way.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, and you mentioned earlier about time frames, because one of the things that I think I find a challenge being dyslexic is that a lot of the time you can do it. You've got the capacity, the mental capacity to do the task at hand, but you just need that little bit extra time. And like you said about exams and things, like you can't throw these children into exams and expect them to cater to that immediately. And a lot of what we do here at Loddon is vocational stuff, like you said, like life skills and things. And then we found that repetition helps, doesn't it? Yeah. So every week we're doing the same thing. But before I do my story, I have a ritualistic sort of hum that I do and things like that, and it just sort of gauges their attention, and it's something familiar. And I think that the repetition thing that you said, I think, is very important. And then that's your proof, isn't it, that they've got that skill down, and they know what their expectation of that task is. Yeah.
The other thing also I didn't say is also, which actually is important to add, is also to ensure that you're preventing learned helplessness of individuals, because what does tend to happen sometimes is that if parents are not trying to support that independency, then those individuals can become reliant on a parent. Or in schools, they found that when they did a load of research, if a TA just sits on one child without moving around a classroom, that can then happen. So then if the TA is not there, then that individual is struggling to move on. So, and you do that by scaffolding. You scaffold up by giving somebody support. Once they've got the skill, then you scaffold back down. You don't just remove the scaffold. And so what you should be doing that in skills and in independence, you should be doing that and thinking about that all the time. So scaffolding up and scaffolding down to support the individual.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, because I've had experience that both here at Loddon and when I was at Duff House, is when children become somewhat reliant on a certain staff member or a certain way of doing things, and that they're unable to be flexible. Yeah. And then they miss out on education because they're just not in that comfortable place. And like you said, there's been a few occasions where because of absences and things like that, suddenly that support system's gone, and they do not have a good day. Yeah, and it's kind of like we do need. I like the idea of the scaffolding up, scaffolding down, and so you get them to a point where they can self-regulate a bit better now that they've got the strategies in place.
Yeah. But I think also it's also accepting and finding those people who can be a support network. You know, so even now, you know, I'm 44 years old, and I will get my wife to check some of my work if I'm doing training. And still now, I went and did a piece of training, and on the first slide where I changed something last minute, I had a typo. So, and then obviously that's a negative impact that I've received straight away. I made a joke of it in the training, but it's still, so actually if you have those people who are your safe people who can support you, it's so important.
Yeah, certainly. I use my wife too. Yeah, I use her too. If I'm doing emails and stuff, just check this. Just, I mean, she's Spanish; it's her second language, but still, I get her to check it because she can spot these things. And I don't know whether it's because I wrote it, so I'm imagining what I wrote rather than actually what's on the page. I don't know what it is, but sometimes, like yourself, I'll just miss these little typos, these little things.
So looking towards the end and looking towards the future of those neurodivergent people, we definitely find neurodivergent people in our workplaces, and we would like to do like an advocacy of the importance of changing policies and changing the way we work and we manage our workplaces, to be able to enjoy, or to bring the uniqueness of each individual and their contributions when we are working on together. So what difficulties do you normally support, or what difficulties do people find at work and you help them to overcome?
So I think the biggest concern to a lot of neurodivergent individuals is the stigma or unconscious bias that they might experience. So I will do a lot of work on my training around disclosure, and if you should disclose, and why you should disclose. And what I wouldn't ever do is tell people to disclose. It's up to somebody to make that decision. But what disclosure does is it gives people control. So as soon as you disclose, you lose that control. And the problem is there's lots of people who are worried that people will make judgments about them, or they're not capable for one reason or another, or they might be difficult, or a lot of neurodivergent people think that if they sort of say stuff that they're not going to get that career jump and move up the ladder, you know. So I think it's interesting that if you sort of look at top execs and stuff like that, there aren't that many people who are openly will talk about, you know, a diagnosis if they do. And I think there's a lot of sort of hidden neurodivergent traits across sort of the working environment. But obviously what comes with that as well, if we're talking about just the traits, is that communication can be a challenge, especially if you're misinterpreting what you're doing, or you've misunderstood the instruction, or you quite know what you got to do, because it means that either you might make a mistake and be picked up on it, or you feel like how many times can you ask a question before you then seem that you're being difficult, or even if you're not, that you're unconsciously worried about asking the question because you've asked too many times. Then there's all these other challenges which neurotypical don't see, like sort of sensory sensitivity, you know, especially in workplaces where you sort of have noise and smells from kitchens, and then sort of lighting with strobes, or buzzing noises, or that anxiety of lots of questions and then moving on to the next topic area quickly. So you then create this monotropism split if it's somebody who's autistic, which then leads to that anxiety. And then the executive functioning difficulties. So, and that's normally around sort of organising time, or keeping engaged in the topic area. And so that can be difficult. Or you've got that sort of social interaction and teamwork obstacles, where often sort of people with autism can be misunderstood for being blunt or rude when they're not at all. It's just, if you're going to ask a direct question, they're going to give you a direct answer. And to me, sometimes that the communication with people with autism, I think is actually quite refreshing personally, because you know what's being said, and then that sort of difficulty with flexibility and in time and challenge. And I have to say, the one good thing that COVID did bring was that it showed that we can have flexible work sort of environment, we can work from home, that we can have time where actually we give people time and space where they can be on their own so that they can regulate. Because actually what you want is the best out of your working staff. And really at the moment we sort of play lip service to inclusivity. And so actually we're losing these people who are highly skilled, but we just don't always know how to manage those individuals to really allow them to thrive. And the problem is when they have these challenges of sensory overload, then that risk of the burnout. And the problem is often people with neurodivergent, they don't want to be seen as difficult, so don't necessarily divulge that they're struggling because they've had to work out extra hours to cope, or they don't quite understand. And so what happens is they will have mental health concerns, and they'll quietly leave the job, and then people won't actually even know. And that's what happens. That's why you've got such a high percentage of people who are neurodivergent, either in sort of who then leave the working world or can't cope in the working world. So it's really important that we really look at that stigma and misunderstanding in the workplace to support neurodivergent people.
Certainly. You think that would give them more confidence to disclose if they were having problems, if they knew that the people around them were sort of more aware of what they were going through?
I had a conversation with someone that is autistic, and she was mentioning that she was accused to be passive-aggressive, but she couldn't understand what passive-aggressive means or meant in that moment. So she requested, like, okay, I understand, but can I know exactly what I did, when, and why you are calling this passive-aggressive? Because for you to tell me I was passive-aggressive, that doesn't mean anything. I need the exact context of this is exactly what happened, this is what you said, in this tone of voice, with these facial expressions, and then I can say, okay, this is how I come across. Because he was saying sometimes this is how I come across or can come across, but it's not exactly the message that I want to send. Yes. So it's like, I'm probably fine, and I come across, I'm saying it quite straightforward, and what people understand is I'm passive-aggressive, or I'm mean, or I'm rude, when it's actually not my purpose of it. It's not the purpose of it, or not my intention. It's just like, it's how I am. Like you, as you said, you ask a direct question, I answer a direct answer. Not intentionally being mean, rude, or passive-aggressive. And she was quite frustrated with the situation because they didn't want to clarify anything. And she was like, but I haven't learned anything apart from feeling guilty and punished for something that I've done wrong, that I didn't even know exactly what I have done wrong, when, how. So she was really confused in all of these situations.
This is where you need training on both sides. This is where, and this is one of the reasons why I set up my own business, because what you need training so people have the understanding of the individual. You need coaching for that neurodivergent person so that they understand themselves and they understand why they might be seen or perceived to be. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the way they think is going to change, but what it does mean is that they might understand more about how there's that misunderstanding. But then you also need mentoring for neurotypical people in understanding those, especially when you've got managers in place and people are telling somebody off for actually just the way that they communicate. And this comes to these mismatch of etiquette between neurotypical and neurodivergent people. Because it also reminds me of, I've got sort of similar to yours, but on a different level, where I've coached somebody who's a really well-known business person, who's sort of got about, I think he's got 15 to 30 employees underneath him. And he said he wanted to understand his autism more. So he got a diagnosis and one of the things that we worked on was empathy, because he said, some of my staff are don't think I'm empathetic. So we went through the process, and actually, even with him, who's, you know, he's a really successful businessman, we went through, oh, you should, you know, you need to do this. And for some of it, he was like, but I just don't see the reasoning why I need to see that. So he hasn't changed his thinking, but what he's recognised now, that actually if he wants to engage and make his staff feel that they're valued, even though he doesn't necessarily think like that, he's now put that in place. And so it's skills like that where it's just not necessarily relevant to him, but has realised actually if he wants to make that connection between his staff, then that's what he needs to do.
Yeah, because it's all about that diversity at the end of the day. They have their own mind, they have their own way of thinking, and as much as they are trying to understand you need to understand what's going on with them, and how you well, is it, do you go through like interaction sort of stuff with him, or is it more about his the way he manages the team?
Both
right.
interaction and the way he manages the team, and actually looking about how and why people feel valued, and just because you don't need that sort of reassurance, other people do, and having that understanding. And I think the key thing, as I said to you before, couldn't necessarily change the way somebody thinks, but I can give them understanding to how other people think, and that's the important thing in that. And the problem is at the moment is that you have, in effect, neurodivergent people living in a neurotypical world, and they're the ones that have to compromise all the time.
Sure.
And actually the compromise should be both ways.
Yes, I get you.
Yeah.
So you mentioned about the mental health, and definitely affects their mental health. How specifically those difficulties and those barriers affect their mental health, apart from being burned up and leaving the job, which probably is kind of the last step, is it?
So are you asking how does it impact them, or are you asking what do they need to do to manage it?
How it impacts them from the mental health point of view?
Well, you've got to think, somebody who's neurodivergent, they might all the time, so I talk with the people I work with about the jug analogy. I don't know if you've heard the jug analogy.
Oh, is that with the water?
Yeah, so in effect, we're a jug. Everybody's a different size jug, and we have stimuli which fills up our jug. And when we get to the top of our jug overflows, and that is where somebody will where they'll burn out, and basically what they will have, they have a meltdown or shutdown. And then if you have that consistently happening, what happens is your jug will shrink in size, so you'll be hitting that point of view. And I think what happens with somebody who's neurodivergent, there's so many more stimuli coming back to the individual. You know, so if you're affected by your senses, you can just get up in the morning and it might be something's too loud, or something's not loud enough, or the smells. And so all these sort of things, if you're thinking about this jug analogy already, imagine if somebody comes to work and the light's buzzing in the office, there's too much noise going on, already those anxiety levels have increased. Then imagine if you're then having a conversation and there's miscommunication, and then you get told off even though you think you've done right. All the time, there's all these things going into your bucket, so it means that you're more prone. And then also there's evidence to show that the size of the brain of somebody who's neurodivergent, the amygdala, I can never say that word, in the middle is larger, so that's your fight or flight response. So they're more likely to go into that sort of that response or fight and flight.
It's more in instinctive sort of mode.
Yeah. And they have a smaller frontal lobe. So all these things means that, unfortunately, that they are more susceptible. So what that does is, because they're more susceptible, they're more likely to have increased stress levels and anxiety levels. They're more likely to isolate or alienate themselves, and often the alienation is around, I don't want to be misunderstood, or I don't want to be in trouble, or I don't want to do it wrong, so it's easier for me to put myself away. You know, especially if you're being affected by communication and understanding, why would you go somewhere where people are going to be ambiguous? You know, it makes complete sense to me to do that. And that's why often, actually, if you they did experiments on putting neurotypical and neurodiverse people in a room, and straight away there was this divide because you go to your tribe in a sense of understanding. And it's really interesting because when my son goes to Link Club, which is that's people from Dove House, and just the way people communicate in that group is very different, but everybody gets each other, and you can really see that. And it doesn't have to be all like verbal, and it doesn't have to all be let's just have small talk conversations, which actually is irrelevant to some neurotypical people. And then also with that mental health, because you're having that negative impact from the environment, then what that does is lower the self-esteem, because what you do is end up focusing on the negative because you're getting so much. And that's why I said earlier that we've really got to highlight those positives. So for me, I know if I sat and wrote a sentence of about 10 words, 3 of them are probably going to come out wrong. Now I can change them, but that is still a negative drip to me. That actually, first of all, I'm there going, why does this always happen? I need time to do that. And so it's very easy to get into that mindset of, oh, I'm just stupid or I'm an idiot, which I spent a long period of my life feeling like that because of my dyslexia. And then that's why there's that risk of burnout or exhaustion, because the individual then is trying to quietly cope to keep up with everybody else, and then that then leads to that risk of depression or mood, where you're going, oh, why am I different, or why can't I cope? And then obviously with some neurodivergent conditions like ADHD, you then also have hormonal imbalances as well. And they say with ADHD it's meant to be the easiest to manage because you can take hormones, but obviously then a lot of ADHD people don't like doing that because then they feel not themselves. So again, do you not want to be yourself anymore? So again, that's a challenge. So there's all these feedback traits that you have to, because of your traits, you have to manage. And so it's easy to get into that cycle. And that's why it's so, as I keep saying, so important that actually we have to build a world where we're going, no, you've got strengths in this area. You can see things differently. Actually, for somebody who's autistic, your focus and your eye to detail is amazing. If you're dyslexic, you're a strategic thinker. If you're ADHD, you can really thrive under pressure. And so that's why it's so important that we do that.
Perfect. So from the point of view of the business, which ones are the main barriers to have a systematic inclusion and help individuals to thrive to the fullest potential? You mentioned that a little bit. And what needs to be in place to minimize those barriers?
So are we talking just as businesses as whole?
From the company point of view?
The biggest thing in business is that at the moment, you don't have a neurodivergent voice really captured within businesses. So you don't have people at the right level who can understand and support and ensure that individuals are getting what they need. So you might have good companies might have a policy and they may have champions, but actually we haven't got it at that higher level to infiltrate down. If I said, in the world, who are your top people who are neurodivergent? You could probably give me like 3 or 4. You'd probably say Musk, you'd probably say Branson, you'd say who's Microsoft.
Or Bill Gates.
Yeah. So you might pick up those ones, but actually, apart from that, who else do you know? And that's a problem until those people at those high levels really start to voice who they are, and then actually start to highlight those strengths. Then it needs to infiltrate down through companies, and those higher companies, those tops of 20 companies in the world need to do more in the sense of what they are, and there are people like Branson who sort of he's released dyslexic thinking, and then what you need to do is you need to minimise the barriers. So the next thing is actually ensuring that there's psychological safety and disclosure within companies. So what happens at the moment is that people, first of all, don't feel like they don't want to disclose, and then there's evidence to show that even if they do disclose, then they don't get the appropriate support within the company. So then they are feeling left like they're not supported, and they're left feeling actually vulnerable. So actually they're in a worse situation than they were when they started. So I've had it where I've had companies which have got all the sort of ticked all the boxes with disability, and you'll get told that you're going to get your reasonable adjustment and you don't, or you get told, and actually these are legal things. So actually what we have to do is encourage people to stand up and be a voice, and actually start to, if they're not getting what they need, be prepared to take people to court for it, because as soon as there's more cases about this, then companies will make more change, and that's, I don't like to say that shouldn't be the case, but that's should be. So the amount of training, so the sort of training I do, really I should be booked up every single day going into businesses, but actually what tends to happen is that either there's lack of awareness, or people will play lip service. So Neurodiversity Week comes around and everybody will, be contacting me over that week, and they'll tick the box, but then actually what they do in the rest of the...
Do you think it's a mindset thing that people higher up, they need to change maybe their perspective on like, because like you said, I think a lot of businesses, it might be the way that they think and stuff, but they're very much ticky box people. This is sort of like, we tick this box, we tick this box. Whereas I think they need to sort of encompass a larger approach.
A strategy.
Yeah, a strategy.
And that's what some businesses are, because then you start to remove the stereotyping, the bias by the training, and what you should be doing is, there should be flexible recruitment and hiring, because at the moment there is insufficient training and support. And then what we should be thinking about is those communication or social barriers. What have we got in place to do that? Because at the moment there's a lack of mentorship and career development. And as I said, I think somebody like me, or people who work in this, they should be completely rammed with what they can offer. But actually the reality is often they'll do it when the reasonable adjustment has been asked for, rather than asking the question first.
They're being active rather than proactive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So implementing that workplace culture and organisation strategies and policies, so those should be in. You should be going round, and actually I do sort of a talk for M3 Job Club, which is people out of employment, and all of that is based around what you should be looking for from the point of contact and then through your working environment. So actually when people are going and they're looking for the right companies to support their traits, so they are successful in the sort of working environment.
Thank you, Andy, for sharing your time with us today. Just reminding our listeners that they can find more info about what you do in reddycoaching.co.uk, and you will be also with us in the London training conferences on the 5th and the 6th of October. If you would like to register, just visit our webpage in londonschool.org.
We hope to catch you up next month, and until then,
stay on the spectrum.